Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. It's Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, and it is brought to you locally by PropSwap, America's sports betting marketplace. Sell your sports bet, take your profit, find out how. PropSwap.com. Download the PropSwap app today. We talked a little draft in the last hour. Tony Pauline from Pro Football Network joined us. I know Andrew knows Tony well. We'll build on that conversation. DiCecco's doing a draft notebook over at InsideTheBirds.com. I highly recommend that you guys dive into that if you're a fan of the draft. He highlights a position of need for the Eagles. Tony brought up an interesting point to us. We'll get into that with Andrew DiCecco right now for today's edition of Football at 4. Welcome back, Andrew. What's up, my man?
Hey, Mike. How are you? It's cool that you had Tony on. Tony's been a great mentor when I was over at Pro Football Network. Great guy.
Very good, very knowledgeable. Liked his insights. He brought up some great points to kind of coincide with what you were writing about. And we all talk about the first round. We know the combine's coming up. We'll get into some of that stuff. But he said he really likes this draft deeper into the draft. You know, he said offensive tackle, tight end, go all the way through the fourth round, good running back class. So he said maybe not the best first round, but he thinks this is a good class in the middle.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Depending on the position, you can find great value, as you really can in a lot of drafts. You can find a lot of day three value, and you don't want to leave any stone unturned. And it's all about doing your due diligence from your scouting department. But there's talent to be found everywhere, and I agree with Tony's assessment in that regard.
You know, one of the areas you wrote about is safety, and we know the Eagles definitely could go shopping at the safety department with two safeties that are both free agents. Anthony Harris, free agent. Rodney McLeod, free agent, Andrew. So kind of give us an overview of how you see that position. Is there help to be had for Philadelphia at that position?
Well, that's really interesting because both safeties are going to be on the wrong side of 30, so it's kind of hard to envision both of them being back. Or I should say, either one could be out of the question. So in that case, Marcus Epps suddenly becomes a starter, which he's been a great story of development and progression. But you still need to add two safeties, right, regardless of what happens. So I think that they're best suited in maybe adding a low-cost veteran in free agency and then going the draft route and adding a safety there for sure. You have to invest a premium pick in a safety and finally sort of go against their previous beliefs and sort of go and get a safety, a young talented safety to build around. And I think that they're going to have an opportunity to do so. I really like Jaquan Brisker, the safety from Penn State, as a well-rounded prospect, someone who has gotten better every single season and has shown progression, has an all-around game. I think he can be a fantastic blitzer. I think he's great in space. I think he's fluid. And I think that he's a sharp-minded football player. I think he's going to be in the conversation when the Eagles are on the clock at the top of the second round. Lewis Cine is another player, the safety from Georgia, who I think can factor into the equation as well. Those are two guys that I think the second round, Mike, is going to be an area where I think the Eagles will probably look to invest in the position. I have a hard time envisioning them going for Kyle for the safety from Notre Dame, going for him in the first round. I don't know if they're going to do that. Kyle Hamilton, that is, but I think that the second round is probably going to be a viable destination spot for them to sort of get that position righted. And I think those are two guys right there that they're going to want to look at.
Yeah, picks 51 and then 83 is an area where you think there could be some talent for them. And then, the Eagles have tried in the fourth round. Kayvon Wallace, that seemingly hasn't worked out. Did you get value in that day three at that spot?
Yeah, you could. There's a safety I like named Kirby Joseph from Illinois that I think is going to sort of rise up draft boards. But I think that when you look at the start of day three, he's a player that could be in the conversation there. But you don't really want to wait that long and really hinge all your hopes on nailing all those late round picks and hoping that you discover a gem, because many thought that was going to be the case with Kayvon Wallace. I was not particularly a Kayvon Wallace fan when he was coming out of Clemson. Saw him as more of a third safety at best, more of a rotational special teams player, very limited, better around the line of scrimmage, defending the run, not great in space. definitely not good as a back end coverage guy. So I think that you have the options, and the players are going to be there. And I think that the Eagles need to sort of look and see what's worked and what hasn't worked and where the glaring deficiencies are, and that's at safety. And you have to invest at the position. You can't keep trying to fortify that area with free agent band-aids and replacement type players. Marcus Epps is a nice player. You could probably get by with him as a starting safety for 1 year, but I don't know that that's going to be the option. The option really is getting a young player in place to solidify that and get a young corner and really build this the right way.
Anthony Harris, free agent, Ronnie McLeod, free agent. Andrew, would you bring back either one of those two? Like bring back one, play him with Epps, bring back one, play him with a safety that you draft in the second round. Would you target to bring back either one of those guys?
Well, because the numbers are so dire, it's hard because right now you're looking at a depth chart only comprised of Marcus Epps and Kayvon Wallace, right? So I think that if the price is right, you have to bring one of those guys back, maybe a Rodney McLeod, given his history with the team and what he's accomplished. And I really was not overly impressed with what Anthony Harris brought. I thought he would be a lot more of a playmaking back-end player than he was. I thought he was going to tap into that Minnesota Vikings year where he was, a ball magnet and come down with some interceptions, but that just wasn't the case. So if I had to pick between the two, Mike, I would bring in Rodney just from a numbers standpoint, let him compete for a job in camp, and you really need to add two safeties additionally this offseason, I think, and sort of let take the best four and go from there. But if I had to pick between the two, Rodney McLeod would probably be the guy.
What about the edge side? We're looking at 15, 16, 19. I would imagine the edge rushers are there. We know the top of the draft, probably pick 1, 2, somewhere in the top 5. You're going to see 2 edge rushers go. But if you're hanging around 15, who's some guys that Eagles fans should start thinking about in that spot?
Well, George Karlaftis from Purdue is a player that I really like, although I think that he's someone that's going to see his stock soar and throughout the pre-draft process. So I don't know that he'll be available at 15. Again, you never like to speak in absolutes when you're talking about the draft, but right now, Mike, it doesn't seem very likely. Now, that's not to say that there's not going to be a wealth of pass rushers available at the Eagles' disposal should they choose to go that route. So there's players that I like Trevon Walker from Georgia, who I think has a more athletic skill set, but very comparable to a Milton Williams, and that he offers inside-outside versatility, would probably fit pretty well in that scheme of Jonathan Gannon's. I think that he's a player that would be in the conversation. I also think David Ojabo from Michigan's a player who should be in that conversation. He's a very athletic player, very raw, but has the qualities and the intangibles that lend itself to being a very high ceiling type of player. You're also going to look at Jermaine Johnson, who I mentioned on your show before, as someone who really helped himself with a monster Senior Bowl, 6'5", 270, 265, can add more to his frame, very strong, very good at anchoring against the run, and I think that he has a vast array of pass rush moves in his arsenal. So he seems to me to be a very pro-ready, plug-and-play type of option there. So those are just a handful of guys that I think should be in that conversation at 15, because in my opinion, the Eagles, when you look at their defense and what they really need, I think that you could certainly make a case for corner. You could certainly make a case for linebacker, but I think that their biggest deficiency lies at the defensive end position, because you need to have pressure if you want to win in the NFL.
I don't know. Did you mention Trayvon Walker? Because if you did, you think he'll be there at 15?
Yeah, I led with him. I think that he would probably be right there at 15.
Because I like him. Johnson's a guy who made a name at the Senior Bowl, but Walker, to me, of that next group, does he have the best kind of body of work?
Yeah, exactly. And you look at Jermaine Johnson, and it's very easy to say, was this a one-year wonder type of player, or is this sort of a sign of things to come as he's just scratching the surface of his capabilities? I happen to think that is the case. But, when you look at a polished product, you mentioned Trevon Walker, and he's someone that I sort of equated to like a Milton Williams type, but vastly more athletic. And some of the things he's able to do at that kind of size, you just don't really find. So you're looking at traits at that pick and versatility inside outside. He's somebody who can play at 275 if you want him to rush the passer off the edge, or he has the body type where you can ask him to bulk up at 295, 300 and be an interior rusher and give you that pass rush acumen from the interior. So he can do a multitude of things. So he's a player that's going to be very enticing, obviously, at pick 15.
You mentioned Milton Williams. Where do you see him as a guy inside out, or is he better suited for inside moving forward, or still a rotational player? Do you think that he's a 3-down player at this point?
Well, I think that he's someone that really improved immensely throughout the season. He developed a lot quicker than I anticipated. I liked what I saw on film when I saw him from Louisiana Tech coming into the draft. But I didn't think that he was necessarily going to be an instant impact player as far as, rookie contributions. But I really he already has pro-level strength. You've seen his ability to move offensive linemen. I think he moves pretty well laterally. And I do think that he has the intangibles to become a starting defensive lineman. Now, where do I see him? I've always envisioned him more as a long-term defensive tackle. I think he's someone that could add about 5-10 pounds to his frame. Still a little light. He was light coming out of college. So I think that if he can settle inside, he gives the Eagles an adequate replacement for either Fletcher Cox or Javon Hargrave whenever their time's up. But so I kind of envision him there, and Walker is more of a swing player, but I think Walker can be more of an end.
And DiCecco, football at 4. I know, linebacker, they're not taking one in the first round. But at 51, who are some options that people this week at the Combine should keep an eye on?
Christian Harris, I think, from Alabama is going to be the player to really watch there. When you look at what he can bring, just from an athletic standpoint, you talk about lateral movement, ability to cover athletic tight ends and running backs. He has a long-standing history of production at Alabama, so that's something you like to look at. It's been sustained production, and that's something that I like to look at when I'm assessing players. So he's someone that I think is going to really be in the conversation there. Brian Asamoah, the linebacker from Oklahoma, 6 foot 225, another rangy type sideline-to-sideline player that I think is very fluid and has that range that you're looking for. Chad Muma from Wyoming is a player who I think is going to see his stock rise. You saw what Logan Wilson was able to do. They were teammates at Wyoming, and I think Chad Muma also is in a similar vein in that he's an all-around type of player, very tough, hard-nosed player that I think is going to see his stock boost if he's able to put together a strong combine performance. As it is right now, I have a late 2, early 3 on him, but I certainly think that he's going to end up in the late 2s when all is said and done.
And Andrew, you could explain this better than me because you follow this a lot closer, but the Fred Warners of the world, 3rd-round pick, there are linebackers that were not first-round guys. I know it's frustrating that the Eagles haven't taken a guy there, but that's their philosophy. But that doesn't mean they can't find a player in the 2nd and 3rd round that could be an impact player.
100%, Mike. It doesn't necessarily always have to be that if you don't take a certain player in the 1st round, that they just completely mailed it in and they've given up on the position and they don't prioritize it. That's not necessarily the case. Obviously, they tried to land a Fred Warner-esque type player with Davion Taylor, but that was more of a projection. He was sort of overdrafted by many people's standards, including my own. I sort of had a 4th or 5th round grade on him. I saw him as more of a project. Now, you're going to it's about finding the right player and the right fit. And I think that when you look at the players that are going to be available, you can certainly find starting caliber players in rounds 2 and 3. A number of the players that I've mentioned are plug and play options from my vantage point. So it can happen. It just comes down to identifying the right player. And that's been the Eagles that's been their big bugaboo right over in recent history.
Yeah.
But if they're able to get it right, you can come away with the starting player in the 2nd and 3rd round.
Well, and you go back to the 2015 draft, 3 linebackers were drafted. All 3 made the Pro Bowl. McKinney, Kendricks, and Perryman were all Pro Bowl players at linebacker that were all selected in the 2nd round. So I guess moral of the story, it's not just the Eagles that are bypassing taking linebackers in the 1st round. It's almost like the running back thing. Hey, we're just not valuing that spot. We're not going to take you that high unless you're just completely generational.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a fair assessment. You just named a litany of teams that went that route as well. So it's about you draft on traits. If you think that there's a player that's sort of like a unicorn, I guess. Isaiah Simmons went very high a couple years ago. If you see someone that you think can contribute, or Micah Parsons, right? So if you see a player like that and that type of mold that you think can contribute in a multitude of ways, then you're going to see a first round tag, a blue chip type of talent, and that's going to warrant that decision. But if you're saying just the traditional linebacker that maybe has the certain traits that you're looking for, Well, guess what? Normally, teams are going to they're going to bypass that and go for other players, such as pass rushers and corners and wide receivers. So you can still find a lot of talent in that second and third round. That's where it really comes down to scouting and trusting in your evaluation throughout the process. And I think that there's going to be a lot of talent in this particular year. And if you need a linebacker, which obviously the Eagles need a couple of linebackers.
Speaking of one of them, you mentioned Davion Taylor. I want to get your opinion on the small sample size we got of him, and are you excited to see what he is next year? I mean, do you go to training camp if you're John Gannon saying, man, I really like what I saw from Taylor. He's my guy.
I don't know that you can. I think that would sort of be malpractice on Jonathan Gannon's end, because while you have seen glimpses and encouraging signs in his progression, he's also suffered from a lot of injuries. And I thought that sometimes from an instinctual standpoint, I thought that he looked a little lost out there. And while you saw the promising ability and the enticing traits, you still want to keep refining that and keep building around that. And he'd be a nice piece. But going in there thinking that he's going to be your starting linebacker and that you've seen enough, I don't know that I would agree with that. I think that he would be a good, ideal third linebacker, but you still need to add two in there to sort of complement that and invigorate that lineup. Because right now, Mike, obviously you can argue that the Eagles have perhaps the most lackluster linebacking core in the NFL. So they really need to give that whole position group a facelift.
No question. And obviously the Senior Bowl was a couple of weeks ago. What was that, 2 weeks ago now? And then
2 weeks already. Yeah.
So we go from Senior Bowl to NFL Combine. Andrew, what are some of the things that you, as a guy who covers the draft, and over the years we've talked to a lot of guys who do draft stuff on the show, and I love talking to you about it. I think your depth is fantastic. So what are some of the things when you are starting to evaluate draft? What do you look for at Senior Bowl in terms of draft stock?
So in Senior Bowl, what I like to look at...
Excuse me, Combine. Senior Bowl and Combine. So I meant Combine, but take us from Senior Bowl and now Combine.
So in Senior Bowl, you look to see, in the case of Senior Bowl, you look to see how these players fare going against their peers, right? So if it's a wide receiver and they haven't, look at Cooper Kupp, for example, and you want to see how they go against some of the nation's premier talent. And if you're able to sort of win with your route running and different types of, releases and things like that, that's going to translate to the pro level. Not everybody is able to do that. And I think that when you start in a corner, you want to see how they're able to adjust when they're not, when they're calling it and officiating things a little bit tightly, because that's the way that it's going to be at the pro level. So you want to see, they may have gotten away with that in college. Look at J.C. Horn, for example, but you want to see how they're able to sort of adjust to the rules of the NFL. And basically, when you look at the one-on-ones in that case, I want to see how they hold their own, and I want to see their footwork, and I want to see their hand usage and how they move laterally, and how they're able to handle a vast array of different types of linemen, the bigger linemen, the smaller, quicker linemen, the ones with the better leverage. So you have to look and take all these different things in there, couple that with what you watch on film, and then really you're able to sort of ascertain what this player is going to be and what their pro future sort of looks like after you're able to put everything together. And then from the Combine, there's specific drills that I look at. You look at the broad jump, you look at the cone drills, and certain movement and explosive drills that you look to see where you can really measure their athletic ability, because obviously the production's there, but you want to see how they're able to acquit themselves from an athletic standpoint, how they're willing to test, and how they fare ultimately in the on-field drills.
Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4, really well done. Combine starts next week in Indy, and obviously that is the second phase of this draft process. And then we're really grooving, because we're about 9 weeks out from the NFL draft, April 28th, 29th, and 30th, and you can hear the draft right here on 97.3 ESPN. All right, Andrew, appreciate the time as always. Great conversation, bud.
Yeah, man, my pleasure. Talk soon.
All right, that's Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4, and you can check out all his draft coverage over at InsideTheBirds.com.